I find that my heart burns with a strong sense of connection to them and to God.
Welcome to the La Casa de Cristo Sermoncast. We invite you to check out our website, lacasadecristo.com, for everything going on at the church. Also, follow us on social media under the username La Casa Family. Now, let's get into the sermon.
So as Sharon read, now that same day, the two of them were going to a village called Emmaus. And they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was walking with us on the road?" I have to say that the story of the road to Emmaus is one of my favorite post-Easter stories. And as a part of my sermon, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of a testimony in terms of how this passage has affected me. That story wasn't always one of my favorite stories. It always seemed like just a nice story to me. But for a long time, it really didn't have a lot of impact. I just saw it as a story about Jesus explaining, or better yet, prescribing how things needed to be to those disciples. How things needed to be. And then a second point about the importance of communion and seeing Christ in communion. Again, it seemed to me to be a prescription for where we find Christ and where we see him. But somewhere along the way, a different part of the story caught my attention. Or better yet, the story caught me. It's the image of Jesus walking alongside the disciples. Walking alongside and having a conversation about the events of that day. And describing where God fits in to those events. There's a word that's come in vogue in our church the last 30 years that kind of follows along with this story, and the word is accompany. How Jesus walks with us and we walk with each other. And so, somehow this image has grabbed hold of me because it seems to be true to my life experience, to my faith journey these days. Much truer than the earlier way of my thinking. God just seems to be more like someone who walks with me, rather than someone to just believe in or about. I seem to have this running conversation with God many days, describing my life experiences, and then I seem to hear back from God as God describes how I am a part of God's story. I'm not outside of it, but intimately involved in it. For me, it's a literal, internal dialogue with God. And it's kind of like an ebb and flow of living and moving, and having God be an actual part of my being. I don't know if it makes sense, but my faith journey seems to be much more descriptive than prescriptive. And I'm going to try to explain. Growing up in a Christian family all my youth, God was more of a concept, something or someone to believe in or believe about. It wasn't that I wasn't aware of God's presence, I was. But I actually saw God through the same lens I saw everything else. And that was as something that somehow God was something to figure out, to solve, to work with. My faith in those days was something to be accomplished, achieved, somehow arrived at. And the Bible, the church, and theology were all there, as far as I was concerned, to prescribe how I was going to get there. It was a prescription for proper belief, proper action, and proper thoughts. And if those things weren't going to prescribe how to get there, they at the very best would prescribe where I was to be at any point in my journey. I thought the biblical stories would prescribe for me what I should get out of life. But things eventually changed. I don't remember exactly when. I know it didn't happen all at once. And I don't think it's even over now. But somehow in the journey, I stopped seeing the journey of faith as something to be prescribed and more something to be described. I started reflecting on my life of faith. And I began to find that the biblical writings, the stories that described the same kind of experiences I was having. You know, they're stories of brokenness and healing. Stories of sin and forgiveness. And even death and resurrection. These stories were no longer prescribing for me what I should experience in my life of faith. Rather, they were describing for me what I had experienced. A whole new world opened up for me. The Bible, the church, and theology were no longer a scorecard or a test of my faith journey. They were a story not only of my faith journey, but also all those who had gone on before me and those who are walking with me today. So God wasn't a judge presiding over me, judging every step on the way. No, God was walking beside me, helping me to interpret, see, and experience how God was at work in my life, just as God has been at work in others' lives, including you. And yes, sometimes I'm a little foolish and slow in terms of getting it, or seeing it, or even relating to it. But somehow I've found Christ stays with me and doesn't give up on me, walking with me stride for stride, continuing to share. And from time to time, I find that that fog that I was walking in is lifted. And like with those disciples who walked with Jesus that day, I was able to see. Like I said, I don't know when this change happened, this movement from having to get my faith right to simply traveling the faith journey with the risen Lord. This movement from prescribing for myself and others what the faith journey should look like to simply describing my journey and sharing it with others as they describe their journey. But the change has been a powerful experience. Sitting down with others, hearing their faith walk, their own road to Emmaus story, as I'm able to share mine. Two fellow travelers sharing and describing their stories, rather than prescribing beliefs for the other. And in so doing, their eyes are opened to the ways that Christ is present in life. Christ then is shared and recognized. So to put it another way, when I sit down with others and describe my faith walk, and hear them describe theirs, I find that my heart burns with a strong sense of connection to them and to God. On the other hand, when I sit down with some people and they try to prescribe for me what I should think, what I should believe, and what I should feel about my life of faith, I simply have heartburn. And that's the difference between Jesus and some Christians for me. You see, I don't need Tums when Jesus causes my heart to burn. Moving from prescription to description, from thinking that I have all the answers, to sharing with others my questions and my discoveries, it ends up being kind of like a dying and rising experience, a death and new life. And I don't know if this fits or not, but I once had a friend, long time ago, who said you couldn't be Lutheran until you were 40 years old. He said up until that time, you think that you can figure out the world, that you can conquer it and bend and shape it to your will. But then he said, but the time you're 40, you realize that you're not in control. You cannot always be the subject of the sentences of your life, and your activity the verb. There are other forces at work. And sometimes you are simply the object of them, through no fault of your own. And all of that can lead to doubt, not understanding, and many times struggle. And maybe there is something in those points of doubt, those times of not understanding and struggle, that open our ears to other people's stories. I am struck especially by the two post-Easter stories. One is the story of the doubting Thomas, and the other is a story that we share here today. They're not stories of triumph or grandeur or glory, and that's probably what we would expect at this time. But no, they are stories of God who comes to be with, to walk alongside, and to share in the doubts, in the confusion, and the despair of his disciples. Maybe there's something in those points of doubt, those times of not understanding and struggle, that open our ears to God's grace, to hearing, seeing, and experience things, and especially God, in a new light. And our eyes are opened. And then we realize that God has been with us the whole time. So maybe there are a couple of options while having a midlife crisis. One, you can go out and buy a red two-seater sports car. Or two, you can grow in your depth and experience of God's grace. Personally, I'm hoping both are possible. But that could just be me. But here's what I have experienced. Not just to be possible, but actual in my life. That Christ is recognized and shared in the journey itself, in our doubts, in our misunderstanding, in our struggles, in the walking side by side with each other, and in the sharing of those questions and the confusion. The journey of faith is not about having all the right answers for yourself or for others. It's not about prescribing for yourself or others a certain way to act or a certain way to believe or feel. Who really needs that? Frankly, I find that having all the answers to be kind of boring. Jesus does not give a lecture in the night in which he was betrayed. He doesn't prescribe a certain way to act, believe, or feel. He simply describes what he is doing and what is happening to them at this most profound time in their faith journey. You see, he is putting himself in them and in us. He's going along with them and us. As far as they're concerned, even as they betray, deny, doubt, and struggle. And in time, their eyes will be opened. And they will see that he was with them the whole time. And their hearts will be burning with thanksgiving. No tums needed. There is a refrain of a common song that many of us have heard that reminds me of this passage and the fact that Jesus walks with us. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Amen.